The string lights shimmered above the dance floor, soft golden halos reflecting off crystal glasses and polished silverware. My sister's wedding looked like something out of a luxury bridal magazine. Perfect, curated, expensive. I stood near the back, a champagne flute in my hand, smiling the way people do when they've practiced it in the mirror. Everything about the night was elegant, except for the silence that followed me wherever I went. A few polite nods, a few forced smiles, and then the familiar whisper. That's Emily, the one who never quite made it. And then there was him, my sister's new father-in-law, Robert Westfield, real estate tycoon. Proud, opinionated, dripping in old money arrogance. He'd barely shaken my hand during introductions, his eyes flicking over me like I was a mistake someone forgot to hide. I caught the faint curl of his lip when he said, "You must be the other sister." I told myself I didn't care. But I did. God, I did. Now, as the band quieted and the microphone was passed around for toasts, I could feel the tension in my chest rising, a mix of nerves, anger, and something deeper. My sister laughed under the floral arch, radiant in lace, while her new family looked on approvingly. And me? I was about to speak. He didn't know it yet, but the woman he'd snubbed tonight was not the same girl the world once pitied. 2 years ago, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Portland. The walls smelled faintly of detergent and rain. My office was a thrift store desk squeezed between a flickering lamp and a window that wouldn't close all the way. Every night, I'd sit there drafting business plans that no one would read, ideas that seemed brilliant in my head but invisible to everyone else. Back then, my sister, Natalie, was the family's golden girl. Beautiful, ambitious, engaged to the Westfields, a family that practically breathed money. When she brought them home for dinner, my mother made her famous roast. The house gleamed, and I was told to just dress nicely and don't talk about your little startup. But I did. I couldn't help it. I was so proud of what I was trying to build, a women-led design company that supported local artisans. And when I explained it, Robert Westfield chuckled. That slow, indulgent kind of laugh that stings more than an insult. "Sweetheart," he said, swirling his wine, "if passion paid the bills, the world would be full of millionaires." Everyone laughed politely. I remember gripping my fork, so hard my hand trembled. Natalie tried to smooth it over. "Dad, she's just starting out," but the damage was done. That night, after they left, my mother patted my shoulder. "Emily, not everyone is meant to be a success story. Maybe it's time to be realistic." I didn't sleep at all. Instead, I pulled out a small wooden box that had belonged to my grandmother. Inside was a tarnished silver pendant engraved with her favorite quote, "Bloom quietly. The world will notice when it's time." She'd given it to me when I was 16, right before she passed. I used to think it was just poetic fluff, but that night, it hit differently. The next morning, I packed my things. I quit my part-time job at the cafe, closed my laptop, and drove until the city skyline disappeared in my rearview mirror. I didn't know where I was going, only that I was done waiting for permission to believe in myself. That was the day I decided to bloom, even if no one was watching. The first few months were brutal. I rented a small room above a bookstore in Seattle, surviving on instant noodles and hope. During the day, I handed out flyers for local shops. At night, I taught myself digital design from YouTube tutorials and free online courses. My hands cramped from hours of clicking, sketching, erasing, and redoing, but for the first time, the exhaustion felt purposeful. Every rejection email stung, but I stopped deleting them. I kept them in a folder labeled "Proof I Tried." Then one afternoon, while I was sipping dollar coffee at a corner cafe, a woman sat beside me. Her name was Martha Green, a retired creative director who'd overheard me pitching my handmade product line over the phone. Instead of laughing, she asked to see my work. When I nervously handed her my samples, hand-painted tote bags inspired by Northwest landscapes, she ran her fingers over the fabric and said, "You've got raw talent, kid. What you need is direction." That was the day everything began to shift. Martha became my mentor, my sounding board, and occasionally my therapist. She introduced me to her old contacts, boutique owners, online sellers, magazine editors. My design started appearing in small pop-up stores, then local fairs, and eventually on the pages of a regional style blog. The orders grew faster than I could handle. I turned my room into a workshop, paint stains on the floor, boxes stacked to the ceiling, invoices taped to the wall. I hired 2 local women to help with packaging. We laughed, worked, and shared takeout meals until midnight. Every milestone felt like a quiet rebellion against every condescending smile I'd ever endured. But I kept my success close to the chest. Whenever family called, I gave vague updates, still figuring things out, or just staying busy. I didn't want their validation anymore. I wanted peace. Then came the big break, a partnership with an eco-conscious brand that wanted to feature my designs nationwide. When the contract came through, I cried right there in the middle of my messy workshop. Martha hugged me and whispered, "Bloom quietly, Emily. You're doing it." Within a year, I'd launched my own company, North Bloom Designs. What started with a paintbrush and hope turned into a brand sold in over 50 stores. Still, I never flaunted it. I didn't post luxury photos, didn't brag. My success lived in silence, stitched into every pattern I created. The irony? My sister's wedding was the first time in years our entire family and the Westfields would see me again. I told myself I was going just to celebrate her happiness. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was time to face the man who once laughed at my dreams. He had no idea how much the girl he dismissed had changed. The microphone felt heavier than I expected, slick against my fingers, humming faintly with feedback. I hadn't planned to speak. But when the best man's speech ended and the room filled with polite laughter, I caught Robert Westfield's amused glance, the same one I'd seen 2 years ago across my mother's dinner table. That same smirk. That same silent message. "You don't belong here." So when my sister's husband, Daniel, smiled and said, "Emily, would you like to say something?" I stood. My heart thudded in my chest, but my voice, when it came out, was steady. "I wasn't planning to," I began, forcing a small smile, "but weddings have a funny way of reminding us how far we've come and how far we've been pushed." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Robert leaned back, arms crossed, already bored. I continued. "When Natalie and I were younger, we used to talk about our dreams. Hers were always crystal clear. The big house, the perfect husband, the elegant life." I paused, looking at her. She blushed, laughing softly. Mine were smaller. I just wanted to create something that mattered. A few people nodded. My palms were damp, but I didn't break eye contact. I remember once being told that passion doesn't pay the bills. My gaze drifted to Robert, whose expression stiffened slightly. That maybe was time I became more realistic. But I learned something since then. Realism is overrated. The room went quiet. 2 years ago, I was painting tote bags in a tiny room above a bookstore. Today, I hesitated just long enough for silence to hang in the air. Today, those designs are sold in over 50 stores across the country under my company, North Bloom Designs. Murmurs spread through the tables. Someone gasped softly. Even the band members looked up. I smiled faintly. We partner with women artisans from small towns, giving them fair wages and creative freedom. And last quarter, we hit our first million in sales. The sound that followed wasn't applause. It was disbelief. The kind that thickens the air, heavy and electric. Robert's wine glass paused midair. His face, that smooth, confident mask, flickered for the first time. He blinked, adjusted his tie, then looked away as if trying to compose himself. I took a slow sip of champagne, my voice soft but certain. "So, I suppose passion can pay the bills if you stop asking permission to use it." A few people laughed, then clapped, hesitant at first, then louder. My mother covered her mouth, her eyes glistening. Natalie beamed at me, her voice trembling as she whispered, I had no idea." I shrugged gently. I didn't need anyone to know. I just needed to do it. I looked back at Robert one last time. "And to Mr. Westfield," I added, tilting my head with polite warmth, "thank you. Sometimes a little doubt is the best motivation a woman can get." The crowd roared with laughter, but he didn't join in.
His jaw tightened.
His wife placed a hand on his arm, whispering something that made him flinch slightly. I handed the mic back to the DJ and walked off the stage, my pulse thrumming in my ears. As I passed Robert's table, I caught his eyes. He offered a stiff nod, the kind given to an equal. That was the moment he stumbled, not on words, not on grace, but on realization. The girl he'd once dismissed had become the woman he could never overlook again. The night didn't end with applause. It ended with whispers. Everywhere I went, people stopped me, some to congratulate, others to apologize without saying the word. That's the funny thing about truth. When it finally comes out, it rearranges every relationship around it. I found myself by the terrace, the cool night air brushing against my skin, when Robert approached. The same man who once looked at me like I was invisible now couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Emily," he began, his tone measured, "I owe you an apology. I clearly underestimated you." I smiled faintly, watching the lights from the ballroom flicker against his cufflinks. "You didn't underestimate me, Mr. Westfield. You dismissed me. There's a difference." He exhaled, perhaps expecting anger, but I wasn't angry anymore.
I was past that.
"You've built something impressive," he said finally. "If you ever consider expanding, the Westfield Group would be interested in investing." For a moment, I almost laughed. 2 years ago, he laughed at my dream. Now he wanted a piece of it. "Thank you," I said evenly, but North Bloom was built on one principle: women owning their worth, not selling it. He nodded slowly, absorbing the sting beneath my calm. "Fair enough." Then, softer, "I hope there are no hard feelings." I turned to face him fully. "Hard feelings fade, but lessons stay. Let this be yours. Never measure a woman's value by the version of her you met at her lowest."
He didn't respond.
Just lowered his eyes, the weight of truth pressing down on him more than my words ever could. A little later, Natalie found me near the garden arch, barefoot now, her heels dangling from her hand. "You were amazing," she whispered, hugging me. "I'm sorry if I ever made you feel small." I hugged her back. "We all learn at our own pace." She pulled away, tears glinting in her eyes. "I want to be more like you, strong, grounded. I feel like I've been living someone else's version of happiness." I looked at her gently. "Then change it. Build something that's yours. Real love starts when you stop performing." She nodded slowly, as if hearing that truth for the first time. When I walked back inside, my mother was waiting at our table. She looked older than I remembered, softer too. "Emily," she said quietly, "I didn't realize how much courage it took for you to keep going." I placed my hand over hers. "You taught me resilience. Maybe not in the way you meant to, but you did." For the first time in years, she smiled with pride instead of pity. As the night drew to a close, I felt something shift, not in them, but in me. I no longer needed their validation, but I finally had their respect. The girl who once sat at the edge of their laughter now stood at the center of her own power. A few weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived at my studio, thick cream stationery embossed with gold. It was from Robert Westfield. Inside was a short note. "Thank you for the reminder, Emily. The world could use more women who refuse to stay small. I hope our paths cross again, this time with respect." I read it twice before tucking it into the same wooden box that once held my grandmother's pendant. The studio was quiet that morning, sunlight spilling across the work tables, the faint smell of paint and fabric in the air. My team was out delivering an order, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to simply be still. I traced the words on the pendant with my thumb. "Bloom quietly. The world will notice when it's time." It had taken years, heartbreak, and countless nights of doubt, but I finally understood what she meant. Blooming quietly wasn't about hiding, it was about growing without begging for applause. Natalie called me that afternoon. She sounded different, lighter, freer. "I've been thinking," she said. "Maybe I'll start that small art studio I've always wanted. Daniel's on board." "That's wonderful," I told her. And I meant it. Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's two sisters learning to see each other without comparison, just love. As for me, I didn't chase more success after that night. I didn't need to. I focused on mentoring young women, the dreamers, the dismissed, the ones who've been told to be realistic. Watching them rise became my favorite kind of profit. And every so often, when I stand at an event, giving a talk or unveiling a new design line, I think back to that wedding, to the shimmer of chandeliers, the laughter that once stung, and the man who stumbled when he finally saw me clearly. Because that night wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. Mine and theirs. I smile when I remember it now, my voice steady in my own head, as if narrating the final line of my story. He stumbled that day, not because of my words, but because he finally saw who I'd become. And with that, I closed the box, slipped the pendant around my neck, and stepped back into the sunlight, quietly, beautifully, and entirely my own. Bottom of form.